Welcome to Daughters Who Heal, a series about the road to restoration for the women who have been emotionally and psychologically injured by their fathers. This is a series by our Journey to Eden, which is a podcast focused on bringing you tools for psychological and spiritual wholeness. Welcome to the front of my van. I originally recorded this from the back of my van with the doors open in the most beautiful location with some wild waves behind me. However, the sound was not working out so great because of the wind and the waves. So I've come to Poldhu in Cornwall. I've parked up here on the cliffs and we've got some beautiful waves crashing in the distance. I will have to put a clip of that up so you can see this beautiful location if you are watching on YouTube. If you are listening, wherever you listen to your podcast, welcome. This is our Journey to Eden. I'm Shaylin Fair, and this is part of a series to do with restoring the father wound. And I'm taking you on a journey with me, sharing my own personal journey, what I've learned, so that you can have signposts and some clarity and some hope and encouragement for your own journey of restoring places of being wounded by your relationship with your earthly father. So I've changed locations again. I've just jumped into the back of my van here because there was just way too much activity going on outside of the van, which was distracting. So we'll continue with the episode from the back of the van. Instead of having the beautiful ocean as a background, you will have my lovely flower wallpaper at the back of my van doors. So, what happens if we don't face our ghosts? Well, Carl Jung has this wonderful phrase, quote, saying, which has this idea of if you don't process what's going on in your subconscious self, it will direct the course of your life and you will end up calling it fate. And those wounds and those hurts and those things that are sitting in our subconscious self, we can frame that and give it a perspective of looking at it as if it were our ghost or our shadow self, our subconscious, just that part of us that needs to be acknowledged, restored and integrated. And I'm specifically talking about here the wounds from the relationship we have received from our fathers. I have a dream that I want to share with you, which really helped me in my own processing of facing this ghost, facing this this darker side, this wound, this place in me that needed integration. And the dream I had in my early 20s, it was at the start of just before I started a counseling journey. And the dream was about a house. And I was taken to this house and I had to go into it because I had to stay there that night. And the guide, they were leading me through the house and there was all these other rooms that were occupied in the house. And I wondered which room would I stay in. And I was waiting to be led to the room. And then eventually this guide took me up to the attic of this house, where at the end of the corridor, there was this door into a room. And it was the only room that was not occupied yet, and I had to stay in that room. I had to go into that room. I had to face it. But I knew within the dream that this room was the location of where a ghost lived, and it was the ghost of a little girl who had been abused and murdered in that room. I reluctantly went into this room, very afraid. I remember, even though it was so many years ago of having this dream, I still remember just the fear I felt of having to face going into this room, but knowing I had to stay in it. And I was led into this room and the room was dark. There was this really dark presence in the room and I did not want to stay there. The next moment in the dream, somebody entered. It was a man, it was a priest, and he got down on his knees and he prayed over this room and he addressed what had happened in that room and that ghost that lived there. And he basically did like a cleansing. And then it flipped to the next scene, which was the room completely beautiful, made new. I remember specifically a window open with soft white curtains blowing, new sheets on the bed, just beautiful, and no dark presence. The room had been transformed, and I was happy now to stay in that room. And that was the end of the dream. And that dream has stuck with me all these years. It was very integral in me understanding myself, understanding that there was this place in my subconscious self, there was this place in me, in my history and in my story, that I needed to face, that I needed to bring restoration to. And so when we look at our past and what's happened to us in our childhood and how our fathers have affected us, we're not looking back to judge or condemn or to blame, but we're looking back so that we can understand ourselves and so that we can understand our story and how we can move forward into healing and restoration. There's 3 signposts that I want to offer you today, and these are processes in my own journey, things that I have realized through study and just through many years of basically walking this out, of having really solid counsel in my life, and just having places in me, in my own subconscious self, being restored. And these 3 signposts I want to give you are: the first one is to acknowledge, the second one is to understand, and the third is to accept. So if we looked at acknowledging, so it's so important that we acknowledge what has happened to us in the past. And this is to do with facing that ghost, of being brave and looking that thing in the face, to integrate it into our lives, to bring that experience up from our subconscious self that we have pushed down or we have pushed up into the attic of our mind and closed the door and tried to forget. We need to go into that room. We need to acknowledge what has happened. We need to integrate the more hurtful parts of our story. And in the last episode of the first episode of this journey that I released a few weeks ago, I spoke about a new identity as beloved. And I would definitely say listen to that first, because it's so important to know that your identity is not rooted in what's happened to you, and it's not rooted even in your wounded places. And from acknowledging and realizing that your identity is not formed, your belovedness is not influenced by these wounded places, it can give us courage and a sense of security, so that we can face these wounds, so that we can walk into that room and face what's happened to us in the past and open the Pandora's box, so to speak, with a sense of bravery, security, and knowing that you are beloved. So when we look at acknowledging what's happened, we want to bring up from our subconscious self the wound so that we can hold it, so that we can look at it, that we can understand it and accept it. Which leads me on to the next signpost that I want to give you, which is understanding. And this is such a big part of this journey of finding the restoration and recovery from what's happened in the past and from the wounds of our father. And that is to really know the shape, the form, the edges, the influence, the effects of how the father relationship has affected us in our adult life, how it formed us in those formative years, how our psychology was formed, how our attachment was formed, how we have learned to relate to ourselves and to others from that relationship with our father and from that unhealthy or dysfunctional relationship. It's so important to really understand yourself. And Socrates said, know thyself. And well, at least I think it was him. I'm second guessing myself now. You can check that out. But there is this really strong concept of knowing the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that is a biblical principle that Jesus said, know the truth and the truth will set you free. And we are looking at knowing the truth about ourselves, knowing the truth about our story, knowing the truth about how our wounded places have affected us in our life, how it's affected our emotions and our thinking processes, and the way we relate to other people, and how we present ourselves, and how we show up in relationships in life. And the whole journey that we are going on here is to find that truth within ourselves, to know the truth. And so that truth and the knowledge and understanding can then set us free to make better decisions, to go on that journey of growth. It's not a journey of perfection. We're not looking for perfection here, because we are human, and our preciousness is not based on whether we are perfect or not, but rather we are looking for progress. So how did I do yesterday? Not how will I be perfect in the future and then my life will work out well because I'm completely healed now. It's not really a case of looking for perfection here, but more understanding and then progress. So a few things that may help you in understanding how you have been affected by your relationship with your father. I'll put some links below in the description. There is a wonderful interview I did with a psychoanalyst, Susan Schwartz, and she wrote a book about the effects of the father on the daughter, and it's a really in-depth look at how we can understand ourselves, our psychology, our thinking, our emotional development in light of how the father wound has affected us. There is content written by Pia Melody, who has written a lot about codependency, addictions, and specifically love addiction and romance addiction, and how these things can play out in our lives coming from a wounded place in our childhood. And then there's another interview which I did with my mentor, who sadly has passed away last year, John Sparks, and we do a really wonderful, rich discussion about the different fathers and how they affect us in relationships. So we're looking at abandonment, abuse, and there was a third one that slips my mind at the moment. But if you go back and listen to those interviews, that will really give you a good starting point and some meaty content on starting to understand yourself and how the father wound has affected you. And just remember that you can listen to this content and study and start to engage your intellect as you understand this part of you, knowing that doing this is going to bring good fruit in your life, in the relationship you have with yourself, and then your relationship that you have with others. So always hold that in the forefront of your mind, that this is a journey of hope, and it will be hope fulfilled. It's not a false hope. It's a real hope that you will find restoration as you take one step at a time on your journey. So just to clarify, that journey of understanding and engaging your intellect and putting time into studying, time into reading, to talking to mentors, counselors, therapists, people who are trained in really understanding childhood formation through the father and how that plays out in our life when there is a dysfunctional relationship. So also, another note on that is that most of our fathers have failed us in some way. So don't feel like you are alone in it. It's most people I meet, basically, and a lot of people are still unaware of how their father relationship has affected them. But the beautiful thing is that we can restore in this and start to make ourselves aware. The last one is I want to look at the last signpost, which is acceptance. So this was such a big deal for me to accept my wounded place. I was trying for so many years, and even on a subconscious level, I was really trying to heal myself and bring myself to a place of feeling like I was perfect, like I was whole, like I didn't have any problems. And that would just lead me to a real sense of not accepting myself, always having to work on myself from a negative stance rather than a positive one. So I really had this wonderful revelation, and it was a real moment for me a couple of years ago where I was so hurt, and I was hurt again in that wounded place from where I received wounds from my father, who was it was a very dysfunctional relationship. He was abusive and broke my trust in very deep ways when I was little and in those formative years. So I was really, really trying to make myself perfect, unaffected by what had happened to me. And it was leading me to a real sense of dissatisfaction and not being able to just enjoy my life and be mindful and in the moment. And I was reminded about the story of Christ when he shows up in the room after his resurrection, and doubting Thomas, so as we have labeled him, Thomas, doesn't believe that Jesus has risen from the dead. And Jesus appears in the room where Thomas is, and he says, put your hands here into my wounds on my wrists, and put your hand here into my side where Jesus was pierced. And it was the most beautiful moment, because it just made me realize that he could have returned with all those wounds healed as a perfect being, but instead he has these wounds that Thomas can put his fingers into and feel the edges and feel the depth of them. And that did two things for me. The first one was, it was like God was saying to me, look, you can accept your wounded places, because Jesus himself did not try perfect himself, but puts his wounds on display for those around him to find healing and comfort, knowing that he's been wounded too. And which leads me on to the second point, which is the fact that Jesus has been wounded through betrayal and through his very own creation rejecting him. The fact that my Lord and Savior is so relatable that my wounds can almost be absorbed into his wounds, and we can relate with each other. And through his wounds, I find healing, restoration, and wholeness for my soul. So in acceptance lies peace. Amy Carmichael said that. And when we learn to accept our wounded places, to integrate this part of our story, we can find peace with ourselves, find peace with those around us. We can find understanding for ourselves, understanding for those around us. And we can also face our ghosts with courage and hope. So I hope those signposts for you were helpful. I know for me it is still a journey. I'm still discovering different steps to take, ways to restore in my relating with other people. So just know that you have a fellow traveler, and I'm here to offer you what I've learned and what I'm still learning through my studies and through various means, which I will be sharing with you in later episodes. Thank you so much for listening. I've loved having you here in the back of my van with me. I realized this is actually a really nice place to film because it's quiet. I can see some beautiful waves right in front of me, and there's no distractions, so that's really cool. We'll probably do some more episodes in the back of the van. If you want to reach out to me, you can check out Our Journey to Eden on Instagram. You can drop me a private message there. If you have any questions about your own journey, If you need any support on this journey, please reach out to me and let me know. And I'm happy to send you some resources and just some pointers and encouragement. You can watch this episode on YouTube if you're not on YouTube, or you can listen to this wherever you listen to podcasts. It would be awesome if you could share this with a friend, a loved one, another daughter who is seeking to heal and restore places from her past and her father wounds. So I will see you next time. Keep coming back.